Hey ladies and gentlemen, thanks for coming along. It's lovely to see you tonight. Thanks for coming out to chat horror flicks with us this evening as I read from my prepared notes. My name's Sinclair. I'm from the State Library of Queensland. I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. First, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Turrbal and the Yagara people, pay respects to their ancestors who were here before them. Before we start, if you feel like it, I'd like everyone to switch off their mobile phones and to use the rear exit if you feel the need to leave during the show. Our bathrooms are located just out the doors here. We're making an audio and video recording of this talk tonight so that it can be used as a webcast for people that were not able to make it. So tonight's event, Behind the Screen, Scary Movies. This is the latest part of our ongoing SLiQFlicks program, which is primarily made up of our free films, which we screen in this room 2 p.m. For free every Sunday. So come along if you aren't already. All our upcoming shows are available on the SLQ website, as well as through a series of flyers we have out in the foyer for your perusal. So we're looking at horror cinema tonight. It's a genre that's as old as the medium itself, and one that has always had a vital and primal force to it. Despite popularity, its fans remain staunch supporters of it. I'll be moderating tonight's event, as well as running the film program here at the library. I've been in love with horror cinema since a very young age, and wait patiently for every October to roll around so that I have an excuse to subject our poor audience to all manner of terrors. We are joined tonight by Dr. Mark Ryan and Mr. Andrew Leavold, who we are extremely pleased to have with us. Mark is a research fellow and a lecturer in film and television for the Creative Industries facility at QUT. He's written extensively on the subject at hand tonight, specifically the field of Australian genre cinema and its role in the future of local filmmaking. In 2010, Mark received 2 awards, including CIF's Dean's Award for Excellence in Research and Innovation, and was nominated for 2 awards, including the Vice-Chancellor's Award for Excellence. My old and dear friend, Mr. Leavold, has a lifelong and storied relationship with the idea of the horror movie. He has parlayed an intense interest in the fringes of cinema into the opening of Trash Video, the store which for a decade was the primary source of obscure and cult film in Queensland, including, of course, a horror movie section so thoroughly compiled that you might call it a definitive selection of titles that were available at the time. He's moved into the world of filmmaking itself, as well as continuing to host the occasional social film night that are always guaranteed to be unlike anything else you'll see in this town. He remains a strong online presence, pouring as ever through the dark corners of film that many of us fear to peer at. Following our conversation, there'll be an opportunity for us to all talk and take audience questions. We'll be recording the talk, so I just ask if you would like to wait for the mic before you speak to us so that we can get your voice on tape. I'd like to ask our guests to join us on the stage, and let's get the show rolling. Andrew and Mark. Well, it's lovely to see you here, guys. I'm going to put this aside. I'm feeling a bit cosmopolitan.
It's starting to look like a karaoke evening.
I know. I'll be busting out the hits soon enough. So what's with horror movies, guys? Why do we like them? What's the deal? Is it because there's some sort of a litmus test of endurance? I can take this. Is it because of the craft of them? Why do we enjoy horror films?
After you, Andrew. Well, I think it's a very interesting and open-ended question, and I think you're right on both counts. I think that there is an element of endurance test to it, particularly if you're younger. There is that notion of testing your own boundaries of what is acceptable or what you're actually able to stomach.
Yeah, I certainly remember just tracking down things purely on disgusting value alone as just, well, here it is, what's next, what's worse?
Yeah, because I mean, we pretty much, like, just to backtrack, even before Trash Video, Lance and I used to have video nights back in 1991, I think, and we used to have a box of films that were banned at that time, which would have been, a longer list than what is actually available now, what's banned right now. and we would sit and try to outgross each other with our choices. And it was, you know, Italian cannibal films and York Butker movies and, you know, Mondo films, Cannibal Holocaust, that sort of stuff.
In very unwatchable, grainy copies.
8th to 12th generation VHS bootlegs back then. And, I mean, that was a real experience in itself. It almost lends itself to a peculiar aesthetic, which you feel very at home with, you know, watching a bootleg of a bootleg of a bootleg of something that you can almost barely see.
There's an authentic grime to it.
Yeah.
I think one of the things you mentioned, which is important about why people watch horror movies, is the group aspect. I think a lot of people watch horror movies in groups. I actually first watched my first horror film in like grade 10 or something like that, and it was exactly for the reasons you were talking about, to scare each other, and we'd sit there and whoever was scared the most we'd punch or whatever, and you know we try not to flinch and all that type of stuff. And at university as well, like we'd get the dodgiest Z grade horror movie out and, you know, watch it and so on. So I think the group aspect is a big part of horror movie viewing.
I think the way that you react to a film is very much dependent on who's around you, and if you get a room full of people that are going absolutely bananas over a film, it produces an adrenaline rush unlike no other.
I saw a screening of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the Regent Cinema as part of Biff one year to a packed house, and I think bananas is the most appropriate word. That was just crazy. It was such a fantastic feeling of an audience coming together, all there for the same reason, which is just to basically lose their minds for 2 hours. And that was a good old
A lot of people say that watching a horror movie is kind of akin, a cinematic version of a thrill ride. You know, you kind of get an adrenaline rush, and, you know, there's moments where you're tense and there's suspense, and you get that kind of adrenaline rush. You know, other people point towards catharsis and, you know, coping mechanisms, and there's a whole bunch of theories that people have for why we watch horror movies. But the fact is that people have always enjoyed watching scary stories. You know, there's evidence that cavemen used to tell kind of spooky tales and so on to kind of teach their children not to go beyond the black stump because you'll get eaten by the Tyrannosaurus Rex or whatever it was.
We've always gathered around the light in a pack to scare each other.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's funny though, I mean, we're talking about a certain kind of horror here, I suppose, which is, I guess we've started off on an extreme foot of endurance pushing, of litmus test, but it's such a big genre. Kind of like in the punk, I always compare punk rock music to the horror genre. They're both kind of abrasive, vaguely outside an accepted boundary of taste. But there is so much variation in both genres. I mean, horror can be... It's a wide range. We've seen recently a resurgence in more quiet, measured horror films like The Innkeepers and Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, things that really feel more like a lot of the telly movies that you might have seen in the 70s. So it's a big field.
Horror is cyclical. It's like any genre. So it goes through phases where kind of extreme gore and extreme violence is kind of in vogue, and people are after that, and producers are looking for that. Then that kind of burns out after a while and moves to towards the more kind of suggestive, kind of eerie kind of movies, because obviously there's that spectrum where there's suspense, tension, terror, fright, all the way up to disgust, repulsion, horror, all those type of things. So some of those movies kind of, you know, the cycles shift between that spectrum.
Well, I look at it as the difference between softcore and hardcore pornography. That
Go on.
You know, there are. Allow me, please. Indulge me. That it's the difference between softcore erotica and gynecological close-ups in hardcore porn films. You know, you either get off on the atmosphere, or you enjoy having your nose rubbed in. You know, the grotesque aspects of it, and
it's an appropriate analogy.
Yeah,
yes.
And at times, kind of like around Deep Throat time, people really got off on on everything being hung out.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I wonder. I dare say something like The Exorcist was probably pivotal in that it was. There are a couple of horror movies that have been accepted as just a mass market, this is a product I can enjoy, regular Joe filmgoer, and not feel bad about it. Silence of the Lambs, The Exorcist, and The Exorcist really was about the taboo, about rubbing the taboo in people's face. It was about a lot of things, but that was part of it.
Yeah.
And it's funny because in the wake of that, you just saw so many, some slavish imitations, but also just that general gist of, wow, people want to see a head being turned around completely backwards.
Yeah, the floodgates open for the overt depiction of violence.
Yeah, and like as previously mentioned, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, while not being as brutal as people think it is, also certainly perhaps whetted a public appetite for
that was also
seeing further.
It's kind of funny watching the original because it's got such a bad reputation, or such a notorious reputation, but you go back and watch the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's kind of like, you know...
But just because you don't see any out-and-out gore in there, it doesn't mean that it's not a trauma-based film.
Exactly.
I mean, it's kind of like the grandpa with the sledgehammer in his hand. You are the head over the bucket. Yeah. And they're constantly trying to drop the sledgehammer on your head.
It's a case of like you can smell that movie when you're watching it.
Yeah. But in terms of its explicit violence and so on, like there's far more stuff that's going on in contemporary films in terms of explicit gore and so on.
Explicit gore really didn't come into vogue until the late 70s.
Yeah,
with Dawn of the Dead. I mean, Dawn of the Dead really changed the boundaries as far as what was acceptable in horror films. I mean, you had Night of the Living Dead before that, but that only just touches on what Romero unleashes in Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, that's right.
Because then it all becomes about the money shot and about the act itself. You know, going back to the hardcore porn analogy, it's about the money shot.
Yeah, right.
Am I completely alone here?
No, you're not. And it's funny because you're right. Dawn certainly was I think the first really widescreen release, by which I mean going on a wide number of screens, that really showed that body in pieces deal.
Yeah.
Which ties back to a slightly more pretentious line of thought. Dawn is one of the films that's really credited, and probably it is, as being a societal statement. You were talking earlier, Mark, about horror being a reaction to trauma, perceived or otherwise. You know, and I don't think you can ignore that after the Vietnam War and at the tail end of it, that's when you did have filmmakers like Romero making Night of the Living Dead. I believe he said as a direct reaction to events in Nam, and Dawn obviously being an extremely strong anti-consumerist statement. I don't know, do you think, for example, the rise in what people have called torture porn films over the last 10 years, is that a direct result to, the trauma of 9/11 and then our dark secrets of Abu Ghraib being revealed? Is it a case of just wanting to confront these themes in a safe environment, but this idea, well, there's torture going on?
Well, a lot of people say that, a lot of people have pointed towards that.
Are they just justifying themselves?
Well, it's hard to say. I think horror movies are influenced by the sentiment of the time, or kind of, definitely cultural and social kind of sentiment of the time. So you can't ignore the fact that, torture and so on has been around in the public sphere and so on, and in Iraq, which could possibly have influenced. But, and definitely, like, horror imitates itself as well. So, one or two of these films come out, and before you know it, there's 60 of these films out. And
but then they exhaust themselves.
Exactly, that's the cyclical nature of it. Yeah. But, like, if you look at the zombie film as well, initially you could point towards the zombie being created from, scientific or possibly experiments, military experiments gone wrong with the early Romero films. And they've kind of evolved towards the kind of the viral infections and so on with the rage virus and so on. And The Walking Dead at the moment, if people are watching that series, it's kind of hinting at kind of new possibilities as well, that they're moving beyond that. And that's kind of almost an environmental theme in there, like talking about whether the earth is cleansing itself and, all this type of stuff. So these things evolve depending on social kind of sentiment.
And I think on an aesthetic level, I think the rise of the video game has given rise to not just films like Resident Evil, but also this whole kind of, one kill shot after the other mentality. Films are starting to imitate video games and vice versa.
Yeah. A pretty unremarkable film. Well, it was directed by Uwe Boll, so there you go. But his film Rampage, which was a, how would I put it, like a school massacre flick. Really not a lot of redeeming qualities. It was a time waster, but it had some sequences that I would have sworn were taken from one of these hyper-realistic video games.
Right.
They were the most viscerally thrilling parts of the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Another interesting thing is kind of like the internationalization of the genre. You know, like back in the day, it was, if you talk about horror, you're essentially talking about American, Italian, and British horror. Well, unless you
nerd. Yeah.
Well, no, unless someone like Andrew who knew everything. But these days, the genre is really internationalizing, and so you're getting stuff like Dead Snow, the Norwegian zombie film, and all this
Asian
stuff.
horror.
Asian horror, yeah, and that stuff influences Western horror big time.
Yeah, I'm really waiting for the new wave of French horror to get watered down and adapted by the West, because some of the most outstanding films in this genre I've seen over the last years, Frontiers, Inside, I watched both of those back to back on a night that was actually pelting down with rain and lightning and thunderstorm outside my house by myself in an enclosed house. I don't know how many of you have seen Inside, but it was just ideal viewing conditions for that flick.
It's pretty confronting. That scene where she takes the baby out of the stomach, like that's a pretty confronting scene. Yeah.
Note to self: watch Inside. Another note I had here was about the horror from different locales. I mean, you mentioned Asian horror and how that, the J-horror stamp was something that was rather popular about 10 years ago when Ring hit its popularity.
Yeah, but even before that, Hong Kong horror.
Yeah, well, that's the thing.
Massive back in the 90s, and then got swamped by J-horror, and then J-horror was almost taken over by Korean horror. Now it's Thai horror.
It's generally on the back of one film as well. Like
pretty much, yeah. I'm still waiting for the Filipino horror. I'm trying to bring it in, one person standing there in an empty field going, hello!
I'm personally waiting for Zombie Ass. Have you heard about that?
The what?
There's a Japanese zombie film out apparently called Zombie Ass. So I'm not sure if it's like a translation issue or there's a zombie ass. I'm not sure.
I think I read about it in passing.
Zombie me, zombie you.
What?
Zombie ass.
Us, I think he's referring. Not a us.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
As in the buttocks.
Buttocks, yeah.
Oh,
zombie
ass.
buttocks.
Yeah. Zombie ass.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Slur my speech.
Not zombie us.
Sorry, I needed subtitles.
We hold hands in a field. And,
Zombie ass.
Zombie butt. Yeah.
Yes, that. Gentlemen, was there a gateway film as a nipper that you saw and went, this is for me?
Yeah.
I got my own, but I want to hear from you.
I love sci-fi horror. Like you're talking about the diversity of the horror genre. There's a whole bunch of subgenres: vampire, werewolves, torture porn, epidemic horror. I love sci-fi horror. So for me, it was Aliens and Event Horizon. A lot of people hate Event Horizon, but for some reason, hell on a spaceship was just, I loved it. Like I couldn't get enough of it. And of course, Aliens is the classic.
Yeah.
Tons of alien monsters running around with machine guns. I just couldn't get enough of it. So those were the two films that really kicked it off for me. I'd seen a lot of trash before that, and I still remember Scanners, the one where the head blows up. Yeah, I remember seeing that and laughing and ha 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 ha. But it was kind of like Event Horizon that really kind of.
Yeah, it kind of showed you the power of what the genre can do. Yeah. Those funny thing about space sci-fi is usually they incorporate a really decent haunted house story into science fiction horror because you're generally in a claustrophobic enclosed environment, which works out perfectly. Well,
Jaws as a 5-year-old. It was 1975. I was living in Oman at the time, and where we lived were on two mountains, and our house was on one edge of a valley, and there was a social club that would screen 16mm prints on the side of the building on the other side. And of course, I wasn't allowed to go and see anything I could go and see a Herbie movie. But Jaws was one where I actually snuck out onto the veranda with a pair of binoculars. And the sound was hitting me, about 4 seconds later because of the delay coming over the valley. And it terrified the crap out of me. And that whole thrill of seeing the forbidden as well, I think that had so much to do with it as well. And then, of course,
stuck for a long time.
Yeah, for the next 3 or 4 years, I was forbidden to watch any other horror film. I'm like, but Mum! And eventually, Betamax came out in Bahrain, and I watched a Hammer film called The Devil Rides Out with Christopher Lee, and that got me absolutely obsessed with the genre.
Yeah. So
not just the experience of watching a horror film, but the actual, the industry or the cultures that would produce such a film. Not only that, I'd go out and find a goat skull out in the desert and stick candles in its eye sockets and have these fake satanic ceremonies with my friends.
Oh dear.
Quoting lines out of The Omen. It was great. Salad days.
So lucky he was able to kind of push that filmically.
Channel that energy.
My mum would walk into the bedroom and go, I'm so proud. so proud of my little Damien.
Okay, all right.
It's funny you mentioned the Hammer stuff because I God bless her, my mother always encouraged my love of all things uncanny and weird and macabre. It's always been vampires. I was allowed to stay up very young. I'm talking I think this would have been like grade 2 because I used to bore everyone at school with my crazy stories. They would let me stay up and watch the Christopher Lee Hammer Dracula films.
Yeah.
Still watch them today, but the thing that was like a gigantic flashbulb going off in my head was when I persuaded my parents to take me to a double screening of Salem's Lot, the 1979 version with David Soul in it. That was on a double feature with The Shining at the time. We were on holidays.
Oh my God.
And not really knowing quite what we were getting into. Salem's Lot was on first. And the appearance of the master vampire in that film on a gigantic screen to a kid, this would have been like 1981. I would have been in the 4th grade, I think. Bang. Watershed, life-changing. This is for me. And that was it. From then on, it was looking for the next thing. What I wanted to get back to, you mentioned earlier, was the forbidden. Now, back in the day, for us to continue boring everyone with our old campfire stories, you mentioned the scarcity of videotape, having to really hunt things down. I'd like to ask you guys, what is your opinion about the ridiculous availability of things now? You can essentially see anything you want with enough fortitude and a couple of clicks. There are purists that might say, now it's available to everyone, but I don't subscribe to that. It's a populist medium.
It's actually hard keeping up with what's going on in the genre. Like I'm a researcher and a lecturer for QUT, and I'm actually meant to be an expert in this field. So I watch a lot of these movies, but it's so hard these days to keep up with what's going on because there's so many movies coming out from Asia, Europe, Australia, all over, and you can only really get the tip of the iceberg. So I think it's a good thing. I think you become more selective. So, we're all involved in forums and stuff like that. So we're constantly trying to find out, what do you recommend? And I love it. It's a good thing. But there's still pockets which are really, really hard to get. And Australian horror, which is what I wrote my PhD on, is still one of those things where there's heaps and heaps of the films which are probably easier to get overseas than they are here in Australia.
That's something I want to get back to you about as well. I want to discuss Australian horror and its evolution with you.
If it wasn't for Andrew Shop in the early 2000s, I wouldn't have seen half the Aussie horrors which are out there. And now the trash video is gone. There's a real deficiency in availability of a lot of these movies. So
and they had the most tokenistic video releases as well, those Australian horrors that you would stock. I mean, you were lucky to find the one copy that
you had one shot at owning them.
Because they would have just the most perfunctory, minimal print release.
Well, back when I was running the shop, I would have said that the easy availability of films is a terrible thing.
Absolutely.
And it's killing small business, and particularly this small businessman.
Now that has killed the small business.
Yeah, now that, I don't have to sit in a video shop for 9 hours a day, I think it's wonderful. In fact, you know, since I closed the video shop, I've now been able to work on the PhD full-time. PhDs in Filipino B films. And the amount of, you know, stuff that 5 years ago I never thought I would be able to find is now sitting on YouTube.
Yeah.
You know, that I can now find a website for an obscure collector who will now trade stuff.
Yep.
I think the gates have definitely been flung open, and the sheer volume of stuff is literally mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And I think that when you come up against such a volume of choice, then you do have to start putting the blinkers on, and you do have to become incredibly selective with what you choose from. But the possibilities are endless. And in fact, there's stuff coming to the surface all the time. For instance, I got an email yesterday from a collector in Seattle who has now got themselves a small mountain of Egyptian, Syrian, Libyan, and Iranian sex horror films.
Yikes.
From the 60s and 70s.
Even better.
Which I should have in about 2 weeks' time.
Of course you will. Of course you will.
But some of this stuff, I mean, this is pre-Iranian, you know, exploitation cinema from before the revolution.
Yeah,
you know,
it's like, wow, a new genre.
A whole new little pocket. It's like dropping a mine shaft and seeing what is down there. And I swear to God, 10 years ago when the shop was in its heyday, I thought that we had everything.
I know.
And you realise that it's never ending. It's always an adventure. And I think that's the thrill, really. That
you know, it's interesting because not
ends.
only have the distribution gates been opened up like that, but also the capacity people now have to make their own films. You would know yourself from working on your debut, Lesbo A Go-Go, props to all the cast members in the audience.
including yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were in it.
I was.
You were drunk.
It's a little hazy. But the difficulty of making that, as opposed to making a similar production now, with the equipment that will be available to you at significantly reduced price, people can make so many more films now.
Yeah, it's true. A $700 production would now be $1.50.
It cost more than $700.
No, it was $700.
Wow.
We made more money on the opening night at the Dendy than the entire budget of the film. That's exploitation.
Kudos. Mark, Australian horror.
Yep.
We're getting onto that topic. It's a field that you have spent a lot of time looking into.
Yeah.
I don't know, do you think there's certainly, from my limited experience with contemporary Australian horror, there's stuff out there, there's stuff being made. Do you think, in a kind of Roger Corman-like way, is it a good way for young filmmakers to cut their teeth?
Absolutely, yeah. It's always been like that in Australia. It's kind of typically young filmmakers trying to make their mark, launch international careers and so on. And definitely in the last 10 years since Saw, Wolf Creek, Undead, that little kind of area, there's been tons. There's been quite a lot of Aussie horror,
and they're also the visible titles, the more
tip
mainstream ones.
Yeah.
Then you get the guerrilla stuff that gets screened at places like the Sydney Underground Film Festival, Melbourne Underground Film Festival.
Yeah.
The ones that are guerrilla productions shot for probably less than $2,000,
yeah, which
then end up getting picked up and distributed internationally.
There was a film. It's not a great film, but there's a film called The Killbillies. You know, The Killbillies. Yeah. It was shot for like $2,000
from Sydney.
It was like a parody about the Beverly Hillbillies. It's about two hillbilly families running around trying to kill each other. And it's made for $2,000.
It's got a tagline. It's a genre pick.
Yeah,
it'll make a certain amount of money.
Yeah, it sold. It got into DVD release overseas and so on. So it did alright.
And their next film, Bloodspit, which was like
Troma.
a softcore, porn vampire film. Troma picked it up.
Yeah, that's right. You know,
of course they didn't pay for it, but you know.
Well, Australian horror is a lot bigger than what a lot of people realise. You know, since the 70s, we've made definitely over 150, probably between 150 and 200 horror movies. And you know, if you've seen the doco Not Quite Hollywood, they touch on some of the classic ones like Patrick, Razorback, Thirst, Snapshot, Turkey Shoot.
Yeah.
You know,
that finishes about the mid-80s though. Their cut-off point is the end of the drive-in.
That's right. And there's tons since then. You know, like what was the Brophy film? The
Body Melt.
Body Melt. Body Melt, and the 90s was a dry period for Australian horror. There was only 19 films made, but in the 2000s there was like over 70 made. You know, it began with Cut, that really dodgy slasher film which featured Kylie Minogue. It was trying to be the Australian version of Scream.
We hosted the Scream.
Oh, did you?
The Q&A for Cut.
Yeah.
And seriously, it was the first Australian slasher film since...
It was a pretty
in 10
big
years.
deal.
It would have been the first one since Blood Moon that was shot
Blood
down
Moon,
on the Gold
that's
Coast.
right.
And it's funny because there's been a series since then, a lot of kind of mid-tier things like there's Storm Warning, which I stumbled across, which was a pleasant surprise. I thought it was a really well done little survivalist flick.
There's been some really, solid kind of B-grade titles.
Yeah.
Dying Breed, Storm Warning, of course,
I really like
Undead.
Acolytes, for instance.
Acolytes,
Acolytes.
more a thriller, but excellent film.
Crawl is doing the rounds at the moment.
Primal, kind of the indigenous themed cannibal one, which is really cool. And of course, Daybreakers, The Tunnel, the internet sensation, The Tunnel. Lake Mungo, which is kind of the spooky kind of ghost mockumentary.
I really want to see that. I keep slipping by it.
It's surprisingly
it's like
good.
my sort of thing,
And then there's the real kind of basement level stuff like El Monstro del Mar, Inner Demons from Adelaide.
Yep. And then you've got a whole bunch of kind of like this missing middle that no one even knows exists because most of them don't get released in Australia but get DVD release overseas. So Safety in Numbers, which was a really, really dodgy slasher film about reality TV contestants returning to the island that they were on and they get killed by a slasher. Pretty much.
Oh, these are the ones that get shot down the Gold Coast with American accents.
Well, no, they're Australian. They are Australian.
Well, some of them a lot of them do put on American accents.
Yeah, definitely. There's that weird kind of thing in Australian horror where some people believe that being ochre is best, and others who think that they need to be American to sell overseas. And they're crap. But and there was that other one, Feed. Do you remember Feed?
Yeah.
Which was kind of more a psychological thriller, kind of psychological horror about how do you describe it? About a guy.
Fat women and the men who feed them.
Pretty much. It was about the world of feeders and gainers, and this guy was feeding people till they die, and people were betting on it on a website. It's pretty hard to watch. But, there's lots of that underground type stuff. And The Tunnel is doing really, really well. You know, it was made for, what was it, like 30,000 and released for free online. So if you haven't seen The Tunnel, it's for free online. It's really, really good.
Is there not a sequel that's in the works that's
there
based
is a
on
sequel in the
internet,
works,
financial donations, I think?
That's right, Screen Australia has invested in The Tunnel.
Speaking of investment, does the Australian film industry, does it back genre picks? As someone who may know more than most of us in this room,
increasingly they are, For a long, long time, Australian funding bodies refused to fund horror and in general didn't fund genre movies. So after the 80s in Australian cinema, there was a lot of genre movies, the Ozploitation stuff and Aussie blockbusters like The Man from Snowy River and Crocodile Dundee and so on. But at the end of the 80s, they stopped the tax incentive, the 10BA. And then after that, government funded film. And so government was kind of...
usually Australian-centric stories.
Strictly Ballroom, Muriel's Wedding.
Love and Other Catastrophes.
And then...
those kind of catastrophes.
Right.
I agree.
Australian identity being determined by...
not killing people. But it's true for about 10 years. The word horror or even genre was a filthy word with funding bodies. My favourite story about that is the Spierig brothers going to Pacific Film and Television to try and get the first film, Undead,
the Money for Undead,
up and running, and the funders saying, well, no, we'd rather have a kind of indie comedy like Clerks.
That's right.
Do you think you could make us a Clerks kind of film? And they went, no. And so they funded it themselves.
It really wasn't until Wolf Creek. I mean, there was Undead, there was Saw, and then there was Wolf Creek. And then after those three films, funding bodies started to put money into those films. And then there was an avalanche of horror movies. And then in recent years, there's been a lot more genre just in general. So the Sanctum, the cave diving movie, Tomorrow When the War Began, the action movie, Killer Elite, believe it or not, is technically Australian. And so we have been funding a lot more kind of action and genre films and so on lately in the last 5 years.
But do you think that's because of the lesson we saw? Like they wouldn't fund Saw and they had to take it overseas and now they've realised...
I'd love
and
to
they
know,
look foolish.
Yeah, those producers, because what happened was Saw, it was... Australian filmmakers, Winnell and Wan, tried to get it up in Australia. Yeah, and producers said no. Yeah, they're like, we can't get funding, or the funding body said no. And
I think it's just that ongoing tension between art and commerce. And sometimes...
Well, Australian cinema is trying to kind of get bigger. It's trying to get more commercial. So it's saying, look, we can't...
the marketplace dictates right now.
Yeah. They're saying, look, we can't only make, Candy and Little Fish and about...
Baz Luhrmann's Australia.
Yeah. So...
not my Australia.
They're definitely trying to make bigger movies that can compete with Hollywood. They're trying to make more popular movies. And some of it's working, some of it's not.
I, for one, are really keen to see that thing in 3D, that F. Scott Fitzgerald adaptation that Luhrmann's doing at the moment.
Is it Great Gatsby?
The Great Gatsby in 3D.
Oh, I know.
Who approved that?
That's the sort of costume drama I want to see coming out of this country.
I want to see buttons flying out.
3D frills. Yikes. Gentlemen, horror and comedy, is there a place for it? The answer is no.
Thank you.
Opinions?
2 words, dead snow.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
I was offended. That offended me.
2 more words, Shaun of the Dead. Okay. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was more a comedy.
It's a fine line.
It didn't pretend to be a horror film.
Yeah, well...
We've had an audience member say Return of the Living Dead, which true, I think it's sheer brutality.
Damn you,
just
Jared.
worked. Yeah, that's what made it work.
It worked in the 80s, all right?
And personal favourites. It's a giant question, but horror flicks that have stayed with you throughout the years.
Yeah,
what do you keep coming
Event
back
Horizon's definitely one. The Thing, always a big fan of The Thing, the original, obviously. Yeah. For some reason, that movie freaks me out. And
I watch that about once a year, and it's amazing every time I watch it.
Yeah.
I even enjoyed 30 Days of Night primarily because it just reminded me so much of The Thing. It's like, I'm kind of watching The Thing. Fantastic.
I'm really looking forward to the so-called not prequel to the Aliens.
Prometheus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't get enough of that series, even though number 4 and 3 were pretty crap. But really looking forward to that.
I think it shows how strong the first 2 Alien films were, that decades later, the goodwill generated by them still makes me keen to see a new Alien film.
Absolutely.
But no, I think Prometheus is going to deliver. I've got a good feeling about it.
Yeah.
Favourites? It's a big call.
Oh, man, I still love my Hammer.
Yeah.
I tend to be a lot more backward looking. Just because I can't keep up with new films. I might watch a new film every couple of months.
Yeah.
And the rest of the time it's thesis. But I still keep going back to the classics like Black Sabbath and Black Sunday. The great Fulci films like The Beyond and City of the Living Dead.
It's wonderful seeing high-quality re-releases of these films.
Oh,
being able
absolutely.
to watch these Fulci films back to that old point that I first saw in almost unwatchable quality. To see
Pan and scan, 8th generation dubs. And then you finally get to see Emmanuel and the Last Cannibals in widescreen, and you know that you may as well just die now.
And you do, yes.
Well, a happy man.
May as well die now.
But I could give you a top 200 list, and then I'm going to go, damn, what about Frankenhooker? Damn, what about Brain Damage? What about... And then it just keeps going on, and we could be here all fucking night.
What about Frankenhooker? That's what they inscribed on his tombstone. Let's throw the mic to our audience who have been good enough to show up and spend some time with us tonight. Would anyone like to speak to our panellists on any topic this evening? Come on. 1, 2.
Hi. You talked a lot about the past, obviously, and the present, but maybe your thoughts about, the next 10 years, or, a future projection about the horror genre and film? Interesting.
I personally think the most interesting stuff is not going to happen in Western traditions. I think the American horror movie in particular is really kind of spinning its wheels, and it's all about the remakes and the sequels.
And also feeding off Asian originals.
Yeah, remaking foreign language
and
movies.
they will start plundering the French I think they already have started plundering the French horror genre as well.
Yeah,
you're seeing that level of extremity getting pushed in the Western flicks.
The remaking Lake Mungo, that Australian horror movie I mentioned, the US is remaking it. So I think the good stuff is going to come in foreign language. I think we might see a turn back to the more, we're probably seeing it already, but kind of more atmospheric, kind of suggestive films. Right, I
House
think,
of the Devil and the like.
Yeah, Insidious and so on. I think we're definitely going to see more and more of that because we've had hardcore kind of torture and gore and so on for so long. I think we'll go back to that for a while. Looking forward to more French stuff, but also South American stuff, Mexican. Looking forward to seeing more of that stuff. And of course, Asian, seeing what's coming up. The Asian horror is always a surprise and interesting.
I think there's some great stuff coming out of Thailand. Of course, I'm going to say there's great stuff coming out of the Philippines. And I'm going to keep harping on about that because that's just a film that's a country that isn't considered cool.
You're contemplating heading over there.
I think I've just sold a film script to the Philippines. No, I swear to God, it's like an action film crossed with a women in prison film crossed with a rape revenge saga. And I was just on Skype before I came here tonight. I think I've got at least a $300,000 budget in the Philippines, which means it's going to be good. And hopefully that'll be middle to end of the year. Nice.
Fantastic.
But the other country that I'm the most excited about at the moment is Nigeria. I think some of the craziest cinema in the world is coming out of Nollywood at the moment. This is the true guerrilla stuff. These are films that are being shot on handy cams, edited on PCs, After Effects for effects.
And being sold in the streets.
And literally pirated, disc to disc.
Yeah.
And being sold across the world, not just in Nigeria or up and down Africa, but across the entire diaspora. And
back to the horror punk DIY element.
Absolutely.
Recorded it. Here it is.
The thing I love about Nigeria is that it doesn't even acknowledge Hollywood's existence. It has completely bypassed every Hollywood channel of distribution and has forged its own. And so it's basically, giving the finger to Hollywood in the most exasperating of ways.
I think one of the scariest things about the horror genre at the moment is the way kind of the mainstream's appropriating kind of the vampire genre in particular for TV. Turning it into teen soap opera and all that type of stuff with Vampire Diaries and Twilight.
But that's necrophilic soap opera, which is...
That's good in the aspect.
I'll mic you up.
I have a 12-year-old daughter.
Okay.
And she watches a lot of horror. But she tends to watch those kind of shows too.
Yeah.
And I think it gives her an aspect of the different kinds that you have. I mean, she liked the Twilight, she's into that Hunger Games and that now. But, I'd hate to think how many horror movies we've sat her through.
We wouldn't allow her to watch the Human Centipede.
Yeah, she was allowed to watch Human Centipede too, but she has seen a lot of them.
She wasn't allowed to watch the second Human Centipede.
So
the first one was okay.
Well, the first one, it doesn't, and it didn't interest her. But I'm not as censored as probably a lot of people. And she has enough to say, I don't want to watch this. Like, she'll say, even if we put something on, she'll say, what's it about? And we'll tell her, not interested at all. But we both grew up on horror at a young age.
Yeah.
So we were very young when we watched it. And I mean, I can say Halloween for me was the one that, I like Vincent Price and Christopher Lee and that.
Damn,
but
Vincent Price, I forgot about Vincent Price. Can I amend my list? Mask of the Red Death, The Tingler.
See, now you got the list.
Here we go.
Your list is done.
But Halloween's the big one that really changed it, that you were like, I'm scared and I don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
Whereas all the others you're a bit hammed up with. So I'd say Well, no, but I'm just saying, like with Vampire Diaries and things like that, I think, yes, maybe not for us.
I'm definitely talking from a purist's point of view.
Maybe.
Yeah, but it is. It's a gateway for younger ones that maybe their parents are a lot more restricted to what they can watch.
Yeah.
It opens them up to, hey, what's more about this? Hey, what else can I see that's maybe vampire or whatever?
So you're saying Twilight is the marijuana of the horror genre? And Human Centipede 2 is the crack.
It's the stuff you turn it off.
Oh no, I agree. I disagree. I think it was an absolute masterpiece.
I'm
not just saying that.
I haven't seen Human Centipede 2. You spent some time with its star when he was.
I went to karaoke with him.
You did.
I got to hear him sing "Sweet Caroline." That was surreal.
I hope you didn't use
With Martin.
the mic after.
I took Martin to karaoke down in the valley. Well, it was Wednesday. RG's was on, and he had a whole cadre of young female groupies who were like, "You're awesome." They just wanted to touch him and go-go dance behind him while he was doing Neil Diamond. It was surreal. But
are remakes wasting everybody's time, or is there a place for them?
I'm not a big fan of remakes. Yourself?
hate them.
Yeah,
Despise them.
Yeah, like some are okay, but when you see a really, really good film butchered and kind of good parts cut out and kind of not even revisioned, just reshot for a lot of money.
You're right. It is kind of a waste of money that could be going into.
And you know that
works.
it's not about the film. They don't even care about the craft. It's all about the pre-branding.
Yeah.
Pre-branding means selling tickets, and it's just a business decision.
I actually didn't mind Rob Zombie's reimagining of Halloween.
I thought that did take it in a different enough direction that it was worth watching.
I mean, you know, for the purists, they weren't a big fan, but I did like how it showed the backstory and kind of the development of, you know, the bad dude.
And he knows how to shoot, you know, a kind of visceral murder scene, which when you get to it, a film like that, it's a delivery vehicle for that, and he pulled it off.
So, but stuff
so
like
maybe 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20.
Yeah, that's funny.
Work.
And so, is it really worth doing? I
so
guess
that means an
no.
avalanche of shit to have to shovel through just to get one nugget.
Something like Last House on the Left, that remake was just absolutely pointless.
It
I was just like,
I Spit in Your Grave remake made me fucking livid.
yeah.
That was so...
Friday the 13th.
It missed the whole point. And the Turkish remake of I Spit in Your Grave. No, seriously. They missed the whole point of the rape revenge bit. It was just like a rape until she started enjoying it.
Oh, boy.
Oh, such a... I can't believe I sat through it, and I can't believe I just told you about it.
You did. Captured forever. I'll just throw to that list the remake of... A Nightmare on Elm Street, which I think was possibly the most disappointing of the crop that comes to mind, which completely missed everything.
Why did you watch it?
Classic. You got to watch it. You know. Hey, I meant to ask you, the films you were talking about that are being shot guerrilla style, that are being sold in open street markets, how would someone in this room get access to those films?
You can download them from Nigerian sites. Look for any title that has God and the devil in it, because the Nigerian filmmakers are crazy about black magic and juju films, and they are the nuttiest. You know, they've got like home-generated laser beams flying out of, you know, a Satan with polystyrene horns stuck on the top and 666 written in Tipex on their foreheads. It is just absolutely brilliant stuff.
Okay.
It's just, you know, all those dodgy kind of mail order video sites on the web. You just, you know, Nollywood, you'll find them.
Or just find trash video on Facebook and send me a message and I can burn it for you for a small fee.
I think this is being recorded.
Well, this has been recorded. I disendorse this product. And
question?
Because the filmmakers essentially... they're behind that sort of distribution. They don't really care.
Oh no, they said I could.
Of course they do.
I got an email from them. It said, "Dearly beloved in Christ."
What do you think of censorship, particularly in Australia? Is it self-defeating and actually ultimately making filmmakers try and challenge that limitation? I'm thinking particularly of The Human Centipede 2, but there's a lot of other films where they seem to actually be going, ban it, we want you to, and it'll get watched by more people.
It is self-defeating, it's true. And it does make us look like a complete laughingstock in the eyes of the rest of the world.
It's pointless because, you know, Human Centipede has got its little niche audience and people go and see it. By hyping it up and trying to ban it, you know, those people are still going to see it and just other people are going to be aware of it as well. It's pointless, I think.
And it also sells it outside its intended audience. And so you have
create a
people watching it.
Like video nasties,
Yeah, who it was never intended for in the first place.
Yeah.
You know, it's for a hardcore genre audience. And if you watch it without those, you know,
those who don't want to see it won't go and see it.
Yeah,
exactly.
But then again, you know, just films these days can be downloaded, watched, and then discarded or deleted off your hard drive, and it really does kind of devalue the whole experience and
Go to the cinema.
Well, definitely of going to the cinema, but it actually, to a certain extent, it does devalue the art itself. It's now no longer a precious thing; it's just an easily tradable commodity, and that's probably the only downside that I can think of this digital revolution in which films are freely available.
Yeah.
Just a quick question, going back to your previous statement about remakes. Given that you despise that kind of activity, how do you expect that then the younger audiences actually get exposed to the ideas, not even to the original ones, which most of them probably wouldn't be able to appreciate them because they're used to high tech and now visual effects. But if you actually show them the original ones, they might even be disappointed about the quality of the movie, not being able to appreciate it until you get exposed to first the remakes.
That's a really good question. I'm a big fan of, you know, new ideas, new films. So the horror genre kind of moving forward, where so there's kind of great new horror movies which freak you out, which come out based on current fears, tensions, and so on. So, you know, my problem with it is purely the point where they're devaluing the original, they're just remaking, there's not new ideas. The horror genre for a long time was kind of spinning the wheel, it wasn't moving forward with new ideas. You know, throughout history, you can think of a handful of really, really kind of terrifying films which have tapped into kind of, you know, our greatest and most primal fears. And that's what the genre is all about. And when you get kind of exploitative, kind of let's just make a horror film and churn them out, I've just got a problem with that. But, you know, you make a really good point that if you get someone to watch, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street these days, the original, it's so camp and it's crap. It was definitely a film of its era. So trying to remake it, I guess, kind of does make sense. But I personally would advocate, you know, the horror genre trying to make new...
To be original.
To be original and make great films that younger people can watch. Yeah. And if they are busts to the films, they will go back to these kind of classics.
I do think that, you know, audiences, particularly a multiplex audience, are accustomed to seeing a certain kind of film, particularly that whole roller coaster sort of blockbuster idea, and to then go back and look at an older film is really quite disorientating. So all I can say is that, you know, parents, and I'm looking at you, I'm saying just, you know, you have to train your kids to look with a different pair of eyes, to see the beauty in an old black and white film, and not just have them dismiss it as old school. Yeah.
Because they have to read it. So, you know, they're reading and trying to watch what's going on, and she'll often say...
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But I do think that the older you get, the more your eyes become accustomed to different ways of storytelling, and so that you can go back quite comfortably and go back and watch silent films and old black and white horrors and Mildred Pierce and especially Vincent Price's.
It's like classic cinema, full stop. So, you know, like Casablanca, Citizen Kane, stuff like that. You know, I watch them and I'm like, you know, I need more explosions. You know, I wish it wasn't black and white or whatever. But you can appreciate it for being classics, and you can appreciate the quality of the storytelling and all that type of stuff. And I think, you know, it should be the same for horror. That you know, the people who want to know about these films will go back and watch them, and you've got to appreciate them for what they are.
Yeah.
But just constantly remaking them and devaluing the original story, it's just my personal point of view.
I think there is an argument to be made that for the value of the older classic films, in that there may be someone who's new to film, that they're sitting there waiting for Michael Myers to start getting stabby in the last third of the movie. Prior to that, though, they are witnessing some really fantastic filmmaking of the time that may be dated, but there's something beautiful about film capturing certain stylistic periods. I mean, it's like the stuff you're exposed to in a classic Dario Argento film goes far beyond any of the on-screen violence or horror you're seeing. You're seeing a completely unique vision there, and it's we were speaking about gateways. It's almost like you're holding the stabbing up as the treat, and while people are focusing on that, they might be taking in some really interesting film work that may lead them on to things like, you know, the European New Wave filmmaking.
Playing devil's advocate, I mean, you can't put a gun to someone's head and say, agree with me that this is a great film, you know, that this is an amazing experience.
I don't know, you see that movie where that guy was strapped to the chair and the guy was like, agree with me, and he had a drill. It was awesome.
And he, but then again, you know, I was in a very privileged position for 15 years, sitting in a video shop, to be able to witness those light bulb moments where, you know, someone will get out a pile of films, maybe 2 or 3 of them will be on a whim. So they'll get 7 safe choices and maybe 3, I'll give it a go. And every now and then you'll see someone come in with one of those 3 films and go, oh my God, this is amazing. I would never have seen this if I did not stumble upon this. Show me more. Show me more midget westerns.
I was just going to say Wang Wang for me.
This Terror of Tiny Town is the greatest film I've ever seen.
It's true.
And then you can say, well, it is actually a legitimate subgenre.
At
there
Trash
are more
Video,
midget westerns, and I can show you.
I don't know what happened, but one of the times I borrowed videos from Trash Video, I got out a movie thinking it was going to be something else, and for some reason it was a Wang Wang movie, and it shouldn't have been. And I put it on, and I'm like, what is this?
Was that
like,
me just randomly sticking
it
for
could
your
have
height
been.
only
It could
into
have
a
been.
video case?
And it was actually, you know, it was good. I mean, like, I enjoyed the experience.
See, that was my light bulb moment for, you know, Filipino
Enforced
films.
staff recommendation.
Although actually,
this.
I'm not sure if you were working at the time. I think it was around about, during your shift. And someone came in and asked for a romantic comedy. And I'm not sure if it was you or I recommended Happiness. But I do know that I was there when the lady in question brought the film back, threw it across the counter and said, "That's not funny."
Yeah, I used to be kind of a jerk. Yeah. Oh, boy. Well, look, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for spending time with us. And everyone, thank you for coming along this evening. We're going to be running a very brief survey in the foyer. We have survey forms out there if any of you would be interested in filling them in after the show to let us know your thoughts about what you might want to see from us in the future and what you think of our work so far. The next Behind the Screen is going to happen on Thursday the 24th of May, when we'll be looking at the phenomenon of modern television and how that's affecting our big screen experience. Once again, thank you all for coming. It's been an absolute pleasure to see you all. We look forward to seeing you again.
And if anyone wants to carry this discussion on and join us for a couple of drinks down at the SLiQFlicks, then we'd be more than happy to just keep talking about horror movies, well, until you tell us to stop.
Thanks again.
SLiQFlicks. 10 minutes. Hey, hey.